Hey everybody, and welcome to the Clique Games channel. I'm Brandon Niegoff, the founder and CEO here at Clique Games, and I'm joined by Steve and Sam from the Innoverse team, and of course, Waylon Fisher and John-Luc Ratliff from the Clique Games team. And we are here to talk a little bit about what it means to have a sequel in VR and how a franchise can help all the titles succeed better. This is our first Fireside chat where we're sitting down with dev teams from our games and from other XR professionals in the industry to give you a little bit of a better insight of what is going on the side of publishers, developers, and other key figures. So sit back and relax, and hopefully you can learn a little bit from this back and forth conversation about Frenzy Extinction and Frenzy VR. So I am more than excited. How are you guys feeling?
Very good. Looking forward to it.
Good. I'm excited to dive into this.
Hell yeah. All right. Let's start off with the beginning of Frenzy. Now, obviously, Steve, you have a pretty long history as this series came out almost three and a half years ago. So can you tell us a little bit more about the background, not only of the studio, but of the games themselves and how you started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of saw a sort of gap in the market, really, where I was looking for a VR game where you can release your anger or frustration and do whatever you want in a sandbox environment. And I think the key thing that I thought was missing from games on the market was destruction. So really started to focus in on that with Frenzy VR, making fully destructible environments that you can sort of break anything, and kept it, very modern and realistic settings so people could relate to it. So offices, houses, things like that. So that's how it all began. Kept moving forward development as, it started to really pick up with fans. They sort of really enjoyed the mechanics. Lent a bit more into the ragdoll fighting aspects as development further, because people really wanted to mess around with the characters within the game as well, and use the destruction to their advantage to sort of interact with them in funny ways. So throwing your boss into a desk that would break and then flinging them out the window. We found that fans really love that. So we kind of lent towards it in that direction. And yeah, it was a very, quick dev cycle at the start, and we released it fairly early on in the process. And even in that kind of state, fans were loving it. So we put a lot more time and effort into it, added a full story mode, added, lore to the game and everything, and got to the point where it is today as a complete game.
Yeah, and then obviously Extinction releasing here recently is quite a different game altogether, right? This is a multiplayer COD Zombies-esque wave-based shooter. So what was it from the original Frenzy experience you felt like needed to be changed so drastically for the new game? What did you want to bring to the formula?
So I think the key thing that binds them together is summed up in the word chaos. So we wanted all our games to have a level of just absolute absurdity to them. And we found from feedback from Frenzy VR that people really wanted a more involved fighting system. So, Frenzy VR was maybe lacking a few details with the enemies. Like I said, it was based around destruction more so during the development cycle. So we really wanted to give fans a standalone multiplayer sequel where there's enemies coming at you constantly at all times, and give them the tools and the weapons to really kind of go to work with fighting them in their own way. So I think, based on the biggest feedback we got from Frenzy VR was they wanted multiplayer and they wanted more fighting. So we said, hey, here you go, here's both.
Absolutely.
Well, and like Brandon, I remember when you first showed me Frenzy Extinction, and it kind of as like a concept. You brought me in not only with Frenzy Extinction, but with Frenzy. And so I was kind of wondering what led you to basically dive down the route of not just publishing Frenzy Extinction, but also Frenzy VR, and then kind of tie them together.
Yeah, I think the biggest point as a publisher that is often forgotten is that it's not just about like the launch of a game. I think it's so easy to think of a publisher's role of like, okay, we have the idea for a game, we get the game made, and then we launch the game. But there are many games in so many studios' libraries that are kind of collecting dust and or just kind of getting maintenance support over time, but they could be performing significantly better. And we kind of called the shot early when talking with Innoverse, right? Where we were all like, well, we know that Frenzy VR could probably do better because it did better at one point. And we know that Extinction is going to be picked up by a lot of people because of that early success of Frenzy VR. Of course, what we couldn't account for was the massive explosion in both of them for launch of Extinction. But realistically, publishing as a decision comes down to, do we feel confident that we can bring value to anything at any time in its lifetime, right? It doesn't have to just be launch. Frenzy VR, with Sam's work on the TikTok, is an incredible success day to day, even before we published it, right? It's more sales than most games will ever see. And to have the confidence of a publisher backing you and just making a few tweaks early on to the TikTok account and doing a few additional organic outreaches, all in hopes of the Extinction launch being this huge revival, and then it was. And I think that's kind of the power of a publisher in general, is being able to decide whether or not a game has lived its full life or not.
So Sam, we kind of heard from Steve the story and motivation of Frenzy VR, and then the continuation on to Frenzy Extinction. I want to hear from your perspective, from the marketing side of Innoverse. I guess first and foremost, how involved are you with Steve on like the story and gameplay build out, whether it be just conceptually or actual development yourself? And then the other question is, what were some of the primary driving factors when you were building out Frenzy Extinction and choosing that specific continuation of the Frenzy storyline, and how you were expanding it, into multiplayer, but also, into this almost the same universe, but so expanded it feels new. So I'd just like to hear your perspective, from the marketing side. Was there anything that worked with Frenzy VR in the game that really worked well with marketing that you wanted to be sure that was in the sequel as well?
Yeah, so regarding the marketing decisions and the overall game, Steve is obviously the magician behind it all. However, I'd like to say 80% of the ideas were all put through me and the other team before. So whenever we came up with an idea, Steve would explain why he thought it'd be a good idea, how it'd incorporate into the game, and then he'd run it past us to see if we either agreed or disagreed. So in terms of decision making, we've all been extremely involved since the beginning. However, in terms of marketing, we had a big sit down and we chose what we thought were the best marketing factors of Frenzy VR and decided to try and incorporate that into Frenzy Extinction. For example, the ragdoll enemies, that is easily filmed and is easily shown from both sides. The crazy weapons, as you know, Frenzy Extinction has over 50 weapons, all customizable, lasers, attachments, and so on. Those, again, look good in videos. And to be honest, the gore as well. From running the TikTok account for over 3 years now, one thing we have realized is a lot of people like gore. So we made sure we incorporated that with the enemies, and they could all be delimbed and sort of taken apart with a lot of gore, which has clearly shown well on the TikToks as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's in both games, there's a lot of like virality, and viral moments and viral frames baked into the development, right? And so because of that, you've been able to gain this huge following on social media, as well as a large community, in your Discord server. Tell me a little bit about that. How much of your community engagement and feedback influenced your decision making on how you're expanding the free franchise this way?
Quite dramatically. When the game first came out on Labs, we really did listen to the community. We actually we liked the fact that we were the devs and the team who listened to the community a lot. So whenever someone suggested a good map, we always tried to make sure that we could include it. Same with weapons, and same with even the enemy ragdolls as well. Initially, they were one type of way. The community asked us to change it, and we did. And we saw a huge uproar from them because they were always extremely excited with that as well. And in terms of viral videos, a lot of them due to the fans, because we or myself make videos that the fans want to see. So they've always suggested, please do a video in this context or talk about this. And we always try and do it as soon as possible to sort of stay up to date with trends and to keep the audience fresh and interested as well.
Okay, so just speaking on that, I'm curious, Brandon, obviously, at the helm of Clique Games, there was a big decision to make when it came to marketing Frenzy Extinction on whether or not we follow the current Frenzy marketing strategy. What lessons did you kind of carry over from that and kind of apply on the marketing side?
Yeah, that's a great question. These are two fundamentally different games with the core foundation staying the same. So on one hand, I think it'd be easy to say like, well, you just do the same thing again, because they are like the same tool set, right? It's, pick things up and throw them and break them and shoot them, and, like all of that's the same. But when your core loop is so vastly different, where I'm sure Stevie would agree that the majority of Frenzy VR is a sandbox, right? There's a campaign in the story, but it is about going crazy. There's no real objectives. But Extinction is holistically objective driven, right? There is not a lot of sandbox in it. There is objectives and bosses and progression and systems you're supposed to use and play as more of a game than a tool set. So I think when we were trying to decide what's the approach on the marketing side specifically, you can show a million things in Frenzy VR about, picking up somebody from their office desk and throwing them out the window and then shooting them in the face. And that's all awesome. That makes for great content, but it doesn't make for a great sense of depth of gameplay or what you are doing. And for some people, that can be a real bother, right? People want direction, right? There are specific sects of gaming that are reserved for people that want to be told what to do next, right? A lot of COD campaigns are very linear and streamlined. They're built to tell you where to go next, because sometimes you just want to turn your brain off. You don't want to think about what you need to do. Whereas Extinction, however, is the exact definition of not railroading the player, not sandboxing the player, but being in the middle. So when you're marketing something like that, you can't just show all the crazy aspects of what you could do. You have to show why you want to do it, right? Frenzy VR does speak for itself as to why you want to be doing those things, but Extinction gives you a purpose to why you want to do them. You want to do them to get the next weapon. You want to do them to unlock all the stations. You want to do it to see the final level, to finish the rest of the story. Those are all intrinsic marketing motivators that just didn't exist for Frenzy. So really what we learned is the mix between sandbox and linear gameplay is only blurred by the question of why am I doing it? And so a lot of the marketing was just explaining to the player why they wanted to complete the story, why they wanted to go through the progression. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned they're quite different. And I actually just wanted to ask you, Sam, from the marketing perspective on TikTok. One of the things we talked about really early was not just switching the name of the Frenzy VR page, I guess Innoverse, and just calling it like Frenzy Extinction. We actually made like a dedicated TikTok channel for Frenzy Extinction. So I'm curious, how did you have like the separate channel, but still drive audience from the like main Innoverse account to the new channel?
Yeah, of course. That's a very good question. So initially, I do want to explain why we didn't just merge both accounts into one. And the main reason is Frenzy VR was doing very well. And we've already acquired such a deep, large fan base. As of today, we're at 170,000 followers. I didn't want to sort of muddy the water and confuse not only Frenzy VR players, but also just random fans who happen to stumble across our video. So the main way that we drove traffic from the Innoverse page to the Frenzy Extinction page was a simple tool, which is just called reposting it. So you can repost a video from the main page, from our Innoverse page, we can just repost any Extinction video. And a lot of other factors, we would talk about it within the Frenzy VR videos. We would mention like, hey, just to let you know, if you enjoyed Frenzy VR, we are currently working on the multiplayer sequel. Multiplayer being the sort of big topic. Obviously, Frenzy VR is a solo player game, single player, and Frenzy Extinction is multiplayer. So we used both accounts to try and funnel as many players who really enjoyed Frenzy VR, who wanted to play with their friends, but in a different world, a different type of game, but still be relevant to Frenzy VR. And then the other way we did so was just by posting every single day on both accounts, on the Innoverse page and the Extinction page, and we just slowly grew them out. And obviously with Clique's help, we grew them out even quicker.
Yeah, and kind of just continuing on that too, the one thing that was really surprising is just in the build-up period before launch, and then even after launch, seeing how the Frenzy account kept growing. Tell us to follow our numbers every week that we have our meetings. How has the Frenzy channel grown? Kind of through this whole process? And then how have you seen the Frenzy Extinction channel grow as a result of that as well?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer without going into the metrics and the actual figures. However, the Extinction page, it was about 10 days before launching, we were on about 5,000 followers. And then within a week and a half, we jumped up to 13. So we more than doubled our followers. And that was purely just hyping up the launch, people tagging their friends, Clique's involvement with pushing it out to new users, different countries as well. Yeah.
Steve, from the gameplay and development perspective, what connections between the two games themselves, like the narrative or the ragdoll physics, like what do you think encouraged players to revisit Frenzy VR after it being out, as mentioned, 3 years or so ago, maybe coming back to it after years of not even thinking about it?
So obviously we've been talking a lot about Extinction recently, and with the launch being so recent, it's been our main focus. So I think people seeing the standard Frenzy graphics in a game in multiplayer and seeing the fun you can do with the ragdolls and stuff, they've revisited Frenzy VR in preparation for the sequel, because the story does continue on. Extinction can be, the story is told in a self-contained situation, so you don't need to know Frenzy VR to understand Frenzy Extinction. However, you do get a bit of background knowledge, and you see some recurring characters and elements within the games, so you get a bit of a nod to what's happened already. You understand it a bit better, and you see some very familiar things in Frenzy Extinction that you saw in Frenzy VR. So I think by seeing a multiplayer sequel coming up, I think a lot of fans were very keen to be like, oh, hey, I haven't played Frenzy VR in a while. maybe jump back in. And that's helped drive some metrics in terms of user engagement and players per month, etc., which has also helped the growth.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was that connection between the two games, but there was a uniqueness, right? Obviously, enough between the two that people wanted to check it out, and especially as we started our pre-launch, our heavy push for pre-launch for Extinction right around the beginning of August. People were seeing that, getting excited for it, but couldn't yet play the full game. So I think that was pushed a lot of people to what they could play immediately, which was Frenzy VR, right? And so I think that with a mixture of just the already kind of viral content plan and strategy that Sam implements, along with just an overall kind of comprehensive strategic plan that was really well timed. I think all those things combined, is what led to a 219% surge in sales of Frenzy VR in August and September, when you compare it to the running 2-month average for the rest of the year. So, and that really is just the very, very, very top of a slow and gradual build, starting, even back all the way in September of 23, when Clique Games came on. And the first thing we did was a kind of a TikTok content strategy audit, and we ran a case study about that showed an immediate uptick, I believe around 25% in sales that first month alone, followed by the announcement and the implementation of the App Lab and Metastore merger, which is something I think we need to bring up. But, so the 219% surge in sales for that 2-month period for Frenzy, also wanted to point out, I had a 104% increase in your daily active users. So not only were people going and buying the game, but they were loving it. And they were playing it, and they were telling their friends that, to come and play it and tell them about it, all to build hype for Extinction. So I guess I'll ask both of you or either of you, were you surprised by the sales boost to Frenzy VR at the point when we really started pushing the pre-launch for Frenzy Extinction? And how did it impact your plans for post-launch of Frenzy Extinction, and even for Frenzy VR for that matter? I say post-launch, 4 years post-launch, right? That's how crazy this is. But yeah, so were you surprised to see that happening, and how did it impact both games?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely surprised. Maybe expected to see a little bit, mainly from maybe people getting confused between the names of the game, but honestly, the level of increase was just crazy. Definitely not expected in any way. It didn't necessarily alter our plans too much, because we already had plans to support Frenzy Extinction after launch for at least several months, and then maybe into the future, depending on fans' feedback and things like that. But definitely surprised to see how well Frenzy VR is still doing. We've always still been active in engaging with Frenzy VR fans, especially on TikTok. We do have plans for Frenzy VR going forward, including future updates. So those have been in the works for a few months at least now, and we still plan on getting those out to kind of really give back to fans that have come back to the original game, and maybe hope to see something new in the future.
Yeah, I think on that too, something you had said earlier that was really interesting is when people were first hearing about Extinction for our major marketing push, right, the 3 months before launch, we were all sort of worried that people were buying Frenzy VR on accident. I remember it being multiple calls where we were like, oh no, are people getting confused between the two? And so we were like watching the reviews of the game. We were watching the community. We were watching the TikTok comments like, where's the multiplayer? Where's, I downloaded this to play zombies and there's not any. So we obviously realized, no, people are just buying the original game because they were so excited about Extinction. What, to you, Steve, does that say about the original Frenzy?
I mean, we've always known people really like the original Frenzy. We get honestly crazy feedback all the time about people who really love it. At the end of the day, I think it is a unique game where it gives you a modern, realistic environment and a sandbox room to sort of do what you want, where there are other sandbox games, but not to the goofiness and silliness with the room scale destruction that you get within Frenzy. So I think even if people picked up Frenzy VR by accident, they would still probably fall in love with the game anyway and get excited about the sequel to come. But no, we do really appreciate all of the feedback that we get, and it really does motivate us to keep going when we see so many people loving the game.
I'll throw in just on the publisher side, when we started to see this uptick and then eventual surge, how did it impact our plans? Well, we updated the key art, on an old title, that we didn't anticipate doing that. And we started doing A/B testing, on different things on the store. We updated the store listing. We're currently working on, finishing up an updated, trailer for Frenzy VR. So I know from our perspective, if we see trends or if we feel or see any momentum on that side, no matter how old or new a game is, we're going to capitalize on that, and do our best in that moment to take advantage. And so that was some of the things, to answer my own question, how did it impact our plans for post-launch? And at the same right, we are very excited for some of the updates within Frenzy VR coming up. I don't know if we want to tease that or outright say it, but regardless, that's something that everybody should be excited about. It should just continue to breathe life into this title. And then in the same right, continue to get that synchronization of monetization, so to speak, of where Frenzy VR is making money for Frenzy Extinction and vice versa.
I'm going to spill the beans. There was a time where pretty recently, Sam, I remember you saying when we looked at the sales for one weekend of like Frenzy, or you made the statement like, this is more than we got the entire month last year. And so just like that huge uptick to really like put that in perspective. And then to what John Luke, what you were saying is like capitalizing on an opportunity like this. This is a 4-year-old title. And so there's a few different things we did. Brandon, maybe you can talk about like the Discord and how like we migrated the Innoverse Discord over to Frenzy Extinction and then kind of merged the two as one because we saw how much traction there was in both titles still. And then if you want to talk about the decision for the upcoming feature that I'm going to spill, which is mod support.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm glad you asked me a very easy question. I think what's really important is, to my point earlier about what a publisher's job is. Publisher's job is not to get you to launch. Your publisher's job is to maximize the sales of your title. And that can be a title that is 10 years old for all I care, right? If there is an opportunity to increase the sales, there's an opportunity worth taking. And what it really means, beyond like a sales and a marketing and a biz dev and whatever, is people are buying a game that is 3 years old. The last time that Frenzy VR got a reasonable sized update was when, Steve? 2023?
January of 2023, yeah.
So this is a game that hasn't been updated in a year and 8 months, right? A year and 9 months. And what is important beyond just the sales is showing those players like, thank you. Thank you for continuing to buy it. And that's why releasing things like an updated trailer, an updated key art, upcoming updates for the game, including things like mod support, where the community can create their own tools and their own weapons to upload and eventually, hopefully, their own maps and other features. That's not just out of a side of like, well, more people are buying in, we can make more money. It's also out of a side of, it feels like an obligation to say thank you to people that are still supporting a game that long. There are games that are obviously significantly older that you can still buy and you don't expect updates from. But I feel like VR is such a niche community that it goes a long way to say to your player base, hey, we really appreciate you and we want to give you more. We want you to have more for your time, even on a title that's older. So that's one big part. But in terms of the actual lead up and what it means to care about your users first and not the money first, is thinking about how they're going to interact with your game, how they're going to interact with your community, how they're going to interact with everything you're building. That is not something that can be quantified into, well, this will make us $10 and this will make us $20. It's quantified in, are people having more fun? We had 2 separate Discords originally. We had a Discord for Frenzy VR, which was created by the Innoverse team and had like up to 10,000 some people in it at the time. And then we started an Extinction Discord specifically to let people who wanted to play the play tests and the upcoming, launch version. But it was about a month before launch where we were all kind of looking at the 2 servers and saying, why? We know that when we promote Extinction, people wanted to buy Frenzy VR, and when people buy Frenzy VR, they want to go and play Extinction. So why separate these 2 communities? They're the same people, right? They are different types of players, but the comorbidity between people that were buying the properties between the franchise, it just made sense to put them all in one place. At the end of the day, how many things do you have to talk about Frenzy VR as a single player game versus a multiplayer game like Extinction? Well, there's not many things to talk about. With mod support, though, there's about to be a lot more. Is it worth having an entire Discord just for one chat about mod support? Probably not, right? Just smarter to have all your audience in one place, because then you can offer them more discounts, more deals, giveaways, better community events, things to do. And those were all pieces of that original strategy that have now been merged. If we have a free version of the game or something we want to give out, well, you're going to start in the Discord. You're going to meet other people who are playing the game. So that way, if your friends are offline, you can just at a specific role in the server that's called looking for players. And when you at the looking for players people, it pings everybody who's currently also looking to play the game with you. It's things like that that are all these user and community centric features that go into community building and hype building. And from a publisher and a dev perspective, when you care about your players, you make more money. You don't have to pick one, right? Trying to piss off your player base by making a monetary decision will never work. It will never work in your favor. It may work temporarily, but it will not work in the long term. It's always about your players. So I think that if I could distill all of a very tough question into one piece, it's that. Care about your players and show them that you are actively trying to make their experience with your game better, and that will help everybody.
You just touched on a point that I feel like I always go back to with all of our titles, but it's your most effective and efficient, customer acquisition strategy is going after your current customers, right? So we already have this huge base of Frenzy VR players. Why not bring them in and make them Frenzy players, right? Frenzy VR and Frenzy Extinction. So I think that's a really good point when you're trying to go after, new players and new users. For a sequel, you already have a large pool set right there that you can start with before you even have to do any external marketing. And that's a great base to go for testing, for feedback, for building organic hype pre-launch before you do any sort of like official Marcom. So yeah, I think it just makes sense. Brandon, I'm going to switch it over, going back to the Meta and App Lab merger. I think it has to be talked about because it does play a factor in the success of Frenzy VR over the past few months. So with these, I say recent changes, but I guess they started rolling everything out slowly back in the spring. But so with Meta's changes on the store, how did this impact Frenzy VR and how did it impact Frenzy Extinction? And I kind of know the answer a little bit. I know that it affected them differently, right? Frenzy VR being a title that was, merged over from App Lab, and Frenzy Extinction being one of the first, kind of larger, more talked about titles that launched post merger. So I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on how that affected both titles.
Yeah, the store merger is a wild time to be in the industry. It just shows how early on we are, right? We were all publishing and developing titles before the App Store went public, right? And if you think about that historically, you can see that with companies like Apple, right? In 2007, there was no App Store to begin with, right? And at the beginning of Oculus, there wasn't either, right? There were hand-picked, curated experiences that you could choose from, and then you had to sideload everything else. There wasn't a store, there wasn't a platform, and then there was a store, right? Apple created an App Store, but made it very limited, right? It was just a few apps from a few first-party partners, and Oculus at the time did the same thing, right? It was an app store for Rift, and it was just a few different things. And then there was this pivot, right, from all of these examples of any app store that's ever existed to where they open it wide. And you go from this walled garden where as a company, you need to prove that, we have highly curated experiences, right? We are going to pick things that are safe for people to go and play. And then you open the doors and you say, okay, we're going to curate. We're going to try to give you ratings. We're going to try to give you top sellers, but it's up to you as a user to decide what you want to buy. How does that affect a game like Frenzy? Well, it's pretty obvious. Frenzy is not a G-rated game where you go frolic through the fields. You're killing a lot of people, and you're killing them pretty hard, right? That's the game. You're killing them hard. That whole philosophy of game design and gameplay, probably not great for an investor group in 2019 showing off a new piece of tech. There's a reason a walled garden exists early on for these things. But for game devs and for players, as is obvious by our placement as one of the top sellers now, people wanted experiences like this forever. But the disconnect between what a company who is building this type of software and hardware needs to do versus developers building the titles and applications for it, they're two different fields until they're not. And that's what happened in August. When the two worlds combined, finally, Frenzy VR was where it should have always been, which was one of the top sellers on the store. Frenzy VR has always been one of the top 500, if not one of the top 100 bestsellers since it launched. But because it was hidden outside of the walled garden, nobody could organically find that information to see that players were enjoying this experience. And it's not for a lack of trying either. There was multiple games that were trying to get into Meta's official store, but Meta was notoriously difficult to get a hold of because they were building a massive set of property, as were companies like Sony. right? Getting on PSVR 2 was incredibly difficult for many titles. And now that everybody's on an equal playing field, you no longer have to make an argument as to why your game should be on the store and then get denied or get approved and have launch dates, whatever. Now it is, if your game is good enough, people will find it. And the more people that find it, the more people that buy it, the higher the game is perceived. And not just the rating of the game, but also in the value of the game. There are probably 3 to 4 other examples I could list of previously App Lab titles that graduated from the store merger that are now selling exponentially better like us. And it just goes to show that disconnect between what a company needs to show versus what players want to play. Frenzy is a great example of that.
Yeah, so it seems like so far the merger has been a net positive for games like Frenzy VR, studios like Innoverse. I'm sure there are, some negatives. I'm sure we could find somebody that might disagree with you, which would maybe be a great another fireside chat, right? But what additional support do indie developers need from these platforms like Meta to ensure their success for their first title launch, their second title launch, or even like doing what Innoverse is doing and actually building a whole franchise, right? A Frenzy franchise. What other support do they need?
Yeah, I think I could even pass this to Steve. Steve, how good would it be to be able to know conversions properly?
Yeah, it's not something we've been able to access points. There's been some marketing efforts done by us in the early days that we weren't able to track and see if, our ad spend was converting properly, but we had to make do with what we had. Yeah, there's a few limitations. I think things like demos would be good to have as a integrated app within a store page rather than having to publish a new app like we've had to do for Frenzy Extinction. And that's a game that's on the full store. There is even more limitations for games that go on App Labs. I won't go into the exact settings that you don't get access to, but there's a lot of things, I think, like wish lists, other quite basic features are missing for App Lab games, which I'm not sure why they're missing, when it's in theory the same back end and same system. But yeah, there's definitely some features that we could do with that would make our lives easier from getting a game to be published and fans easier.
And I think what's important about the response from a developer versus the response from a publisher is that we are absolutely on the same page. And it goes beyond just marketing efforts or development efforts. These are basic tools that are unfortunately missing because it is either previously walled off, which now everybody has access to things like A/B testing, try before you buy, so on. But it's also Steam can give me any info I want with absolute confidence. And that's kind of the perk of them being tenured almost 25 years, as a platform, right? But in the same vein, Meta has the resources to provide more data to users. It's just a question of aggregating it properly, making sure that it is accurate, making sure that it does come out to a helpful metric. For Sam making TikTok videos, it would be great to be able to link directly to a call to action and know that it worked, to know what videos are performing best. But of course, right now, we don't have that accuracy. And I think that those tools that we're missing and the lack of accuracy comes back to how the launch of Frenzy Extinction on the official store post-merger is so much different than Frenzy VR. We actually lost a lot of data with Frenzy Extinction on launch day and up into today. We are still unable to tell many correlates that we want to know between our users. Now, we found ways around that using tracking pixels and websites and Discord, but we still cannot follow those users accurately to their purchase decision, which means we can't build a better experience for users. It means we have to build worse ads, right? Ads that reach a larger audience but can't be as curated because we can't tell whether or not it's working. What's the point of retargeting somebody if you don't know if they've bought the game? I don't want to spam somebody with ads about a game I know they're interested in if they just bought it. That's not fair to them, and it's a waste of everybody's time and effort. So I think Extinction launching post-merger meant that there were so many more games that had the availability that day to be seen. Right? It used to be when you launched on the Quest Store, there would be like 3 or 4 other games that day. But now on any given day, there could be 10 games launching. On Steam, I believe the number is closer to like 30 to 60 at this point now, where there are tons of games launching every day on Steam. But in VR, of course, there's less, but there's also way more need to be seen when there are less games, because it's being this early is your one chance to like catch that, whatever you want to call it, catch that like early wave. Frenzy VR had that opportunity, and Frenzy Extinction is at the beginning of a long cycle to continue to grow and to continue to keep that salience, just because it launched at a time where it was harder to be seen. And it's just so interesting. It's one of the best sellers still. And yet, because of the lack of info, because of the lack of data, it is hard to tell how well that is resounding with the users that want to find it.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
think
weird time.
to summarize that, I mean, basically it's like an even playing field for every game on the platform now. There's less red tape than there's ever been, and there's hopefully features coming that, originally there was disconnect between App Lab and main store. Now with it being one store, there should be no excuses. It should just be like everybody gets these same features, and hopefully they can move faster because of that. One thing, Brandon, that you touched on at the end is kind of like that it's an open door, or I guess it's like early stages for Frenzy Extinction and how it takes advantage of that. And so I wanted to ask Sam or Steve, like, what's next for the Frenzy franchise?
Which is like,
I mean, I don't mind going for that one. It's definitely up in the air for now, and many factors, including how well Extinction is still received. We're still getting obviously lots of feedback from it, as it's in less than a month since launch so far. We obviously have a few updates for that title planned. We have plans all the way up till Christmas with Extinction, and potentially further. We've definitely chucked around some ideas for a Frenzy VR sequel directly, as in terms of, the same sort of gameplay as Frenzy VR rather than Extinction, going back to like a destruction sandbox type of game. But obviously with the advances in technology with the Quest 3 and 3S, we'd love to make an even bigger version of that game, bigger maps, more enemies, etc. We've definitely got a base story for it planned out as well, in terms of how it can link on to both Frenzy VR and Frenzy Extinction. But all of that is currently ideas in a notebook right now, with no solid plans to go on to that. We know we'd like to try other franchises, we'd like to try other things, so it really always does depend on where we are in a few months, I guess, or a year.
And to follow up on that as well, we've got dozens of ideas, loads of concepts we'd love to make. However, we have promised to the fans that we would get mod support out for Frenzy VR, and we would obviously keep going with Frenzy Extinction into at least Christmas. Obviously, we have 2 DLCs planned as well. So as much as we'd love to branch out and try other games, other mechanics, other things like that, we do have to stay true and loyal to our fan base, which is what we've always promised to do, and we will do that first.
I cannot wait for mod support. As you guys know, I've been bugging you about it for months. So looking forward to that.
I think my follow-up on, and again, you don't have to answer this, but it would be funny if you did. An idea of a sequel to Frenzy, right? Continuing what the original game was and moving forward. What are your thoughts after having built Extinction about the one thing that every TikTok commenter has been screaming for years, which is bringing multiplayer to Frenzy VR? Obviously not in the original game, right? But in this potential sequel expansion of this type of gameplay, would you consider building that in multiplayer?
That is a very tricky one, because multiplayer sort of opens the door to so many more complications, and it would mean we'd have to limit the game in several other ways to incorporate multiplayer. For example, the destruction may not be as advanced as we would like it, because it has to work in a multiplayer environment. The enemies, we may have to scale down the number of them to be able to account for the extra performance of added players in the lobby, and of course all the networking that goes, all the messages that are sent every single frame. It does add up. Multiplayer is significantly harder to develop with. It's definitely something that we will consider. Like, again, say, depending on the feedback from Extinction, whether multiplayer was sort of a deal breaker for this game, it's something that I think we'll strongly consider very early on in the development. I think we're either going to go in with it or without it from the start. It's not going to be something we go in and change our mind with. So we'll just, be keeping an eye on feedback, as we always do, and seeing what kind of the fans want compared to their own expectations, basically.
And now
Really
we're going to clip that, and then we're going to paste that below every comment. Ask it. It's going to be the response.
Everyone that says, can we have multiplayer? I'll say, yes, if you don't mind fewer enemies, not as much distraction. See what they say.
When listening to your fans, trying to give them what they want, obviously, in some ways, that's how Frenzy Extinction came into existence. Is like, how do you add multiplayer to a game like Frenzy? I'm curious what other lessons you guys kind of learned from either fans, from development, or just in general through the process of launching a game.
So one of the biggest things I'd say I've learned in the last few weeks, especially now we've been seeing feedback from Extinction. Obviously, we launched a demo before that, and we got really amazing feedback from the demo version that we had a pre-launch for. But I think the main thing people want, and it obviously sounds silly, but they just want a fun game. They don't necessarily care about the story too much to begin with. Obviously, the more you get involved and the more you become attached to a game, I think the deeper you want to know the story behind it. But initially jumping straight into the game, I think you just want to have as much fun as possible, which is why I spent a long time adding a story mode to Frenzy VR, and it really did help with the comments that said, I don't know what to do in this game. Those ones kind of all went away, but it got replaced with people being like, I couldn't care less about story. I only play free play anyway. So I think we satisfied a very small number with quite a large development time, when really, there could have been other things I could have focused on. Like in that time, I could have doubled the amount of levels in the entire game. And I don't know necessarily which one people would have preferred, but I think based on what we've seen, people do just like to jump into a game and go crazy, have fun, and not necessarily get tied down with too many mechanics and stuff. So with Extinction, we've tried to implement as much fun as possible with like the weapons that you can use, and all of the mechanics. There's a lot of them, and they can get quite technical, but they should all work right from the start that you can access. So you never like need to wait for halfway through the game before mechanics become available. As the player, you get the choice to use any of the mechanics throughout the game right from the start. So that's why I think the demo works so well, because people were able to try almost all of the features at a surface level within the first time they played the game.
Absolutely. I think what I kind of want to end on is something we didn't get a chance to talk about, and then we'll be able to wrap it up, which is what everybody thinks. Like I have a lot of thoughts on this myself, right? But what the power of the playtest for Frenzy Extinction was. I think that's something that's incredibly important to the success of Frenzy VR and obviously the launch of Extinction. To at least give my point of view, right? A playtest was the first real way that people who were on the fence about either game got to try it for free. You can feel how good the gunplay is. You can see how much fun, like dismemberment and throwing things and just like going absolutely wild in the demo for Extinction could translate back to Frenzy VR, right? You can feel that you're going to get a similar experience because they're built off each other. Now, of course, no dismemberment. Many people are upset about, I'm sure, still for Frenzy, but like showing that this game has pushed that boundary, right? There are new things added and so on. The playtest, I think, might have been the biggest success of the entire launch in terms of like how many people picked up the game and how many people are still talking about it, because they were able to invite their friends for free. And not a lot of teams do that, and I guess I wanted to pass it to you two to talk about it on a little bit on the marketing side and development side, and then Waylon and John Luke on the publishing side. So Steve, you want to kick off on the development side. What was the playtest to you, and what was the idea of setting it up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always, been in love with Extinction myself. As I've made it and I've tested it numerous times. I've always been able to see it in progress and these mechanics really coming together. The problem was it was very hard to let others try these mechanics and see how good they feel in the game. And that clicked straight away as soon as we had the demos, where we saw all of this feedback pouring in saying that they love these mechanics, etc. Whereas I don't think they would have reacted the same by just seeing a video of it online. So whereas, like you said, they were on the fence a bit earlier, the demo really pushed them into that, oh, you know what, actually, I am going to get this now because I've been able to experience it and it's better than I maybe thought it was, for example. So I think that's why it did really well in my eyes, because, again, being multiplayer, you tell your friends as well. So one person had to try it and all of a sudden they can tell 3 other friends to come and try it, and boom, there you are. There's 4 people playing the game that would not have played it had we just shown them videos of it, essentially.
Yeah. And Sam, on your side, obviously, it's something we had talked about a lot. Showing off Extinction is infinitely harder than showing off Frenzy VR. It has been very difficult because it is a gameplay loop, right? It's less about the destruction and the mayhem. It's all still there. It's more about the fun of using those systems to complete objectives. It's almost as if you were trying to make TikToks about the story mode of Frenzy VR. So to you, I know in our talks, it was the playtest is the way that people can finally see what it's like to play it. So talk to me about the marketing angle on that.
Yeah, of course. So on a different topic, Frenzy VR, I could show off a 5-second video and you already understand what you need to do. It's just chaos. But with Frenzy Extinction, as you said, it's very hard to show off the story or the objective of a game in 15 seconds and still have it look exciting and fun. So I think the playtest helped dramatically, right? Earlier I mentioned that we jumped from about 5,000 followers to like 13, 14,000 followers. And that is purely down to the playtest, because I could say, hey, rather than showing you the game, go test it for free. And then guess what? That person who then enjoyed it tells their friends, who then tells another friend. And that's how it grew so dramatically and so quickly. And then obviously that then linked to people following the TikTok to stay up to date with updates or new features and so on. So from my side, from all things marketing, I think for Frenzy Extinction, the playtest was probably the biggest factor in pushing our numbers, which then obviously resulted in a high amount of people buying and playing the game initially. So yeah, thank you for helping me with the playtest, because that made my job a lot easier.
Yeah, and JL, on the marketing side for Clique Games, right? What does the playtest mean as kind of like a case study of what you can do with a game before it launches?
Yeah, when, I guess this can be applied really anytime, but in particular, as you're and doing all your marketing for pre-launch before, a title actually launches, your most engaged fans are your best marketers. And if you don't have a game that they can play yet, you have to get creative on how you can create that engagement. And I think this is a really great example, the play test combined with the Discord of, yes, the play test is free, but every week you need to go to the Discord at least one time if you want to play it that week and get the new code and then input it into the game. So not only is it allowing them to engage in the game itself, but it also allows them to engage in the community and interact with other people who are playing the play test and who are excited for the launch. And so I think, when you're looking for ways to get your fans and users engaged when you don't have the final product, I think the play test and the community are two really some of the best ways that you can do that. And so I think that's why the play test has been so important and been so successful for the Frenzy Extinction launch, among others that we've done, is we are able to create fans, but not just fans, but really actively engaged and really immersed and involved fans before the game even launches. And I think that's pivotal for the success of a game.
On top of that as well, if I may add, the beauty of a playtest as well is we play the game every single day. We play it our own way. The thing about the playtest is we then had thousands of people who were able to test the game early, so they get the enjoyment of being the first to play it. But we also get loads of people who can then report bugs and issues that we can then fix before the initial launch. So it really helped us, and then they got they obviously got the pleasure of playing the game early. So it was a win-win for both parties.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it. And I think, Waylon, for the final thought on the playtest, I remember our conversation as we were planning this out was about when we should do this, right? Like when we should release it. And in fact, we had originally planned for the playtest to come out months beforehand. And unfortunately, it got pushed back due to development reasons. But, launching the playtest about a month and a half before launch, what was that like in terms of maybe the operational side of actually getting that set up and organized, but more so in what other teams, like anybody else that's listening to this, what should they take away? How soon should they start something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different strategies. It's all going to be a matter of opinion, of course. There's titles have launched previously where they launch playtests early. They kind of get the feedback for development, and then they pause the playtest, and they have like maybe like a 2-month gap before they actually launch the title to kind of have a little bit of a blackout period where it's like, okay, now all those people have to convert to wish lists. And then they also have to, like, if you want to experience the title, there are going to be some additional features you have to wait till launch. And so like that is a different marketing perspective. For us, we really kind of made it down to the wire on purpose just because we didn't want to have a big wish list period. We wanted to learn our audience. A big part of the playtest for us is really learning the audience. Like we got to test ads during that period. We got to test like different styles of videos. We found out, Shieldsy, you mentioned it, or sorry, Sam, you mentioned it, that people are playing the game differently than you kind of anticipated. And so they're probably thinking about the game differently as well. And so when we're marketing it, it's like, okay, do they enjoy this aspect of the game as much as we think they do, or do they enjoy this aspect? And so being able to like test with your fans early, being able to test like what call to actions are working. Can you push people directly to the store page, or do you need to push them to the Discord? Are they engaging more through TikTok? Are they engaging more on YouTube? Being able to experience that before you launch, makes it so once you get to launch, that first like 2-week period, pre-launch and 2-week period following becomes really important. And then obviously everything after that's important too. But that first bit is like the hype that gets you off the ground. So I think from our perspective, we like to like hit the ground running. And so we like the playtest almost leading up into like the launch. We always do at least some sort of a blackout period where it's like, hey, whatever you're getting at launch is going to be different than what you're playing in the playtest. Examples of that are locking it to like one map. I think in the case of Frenzy, did we do one map or did we do two?
The
We
two
did
that
one map and a boss rush, so there's an extra mode essentially.
Okay, yeah. So it was essentially 2 maps, but 2 different modes. So 1 map each. And the reason for doing that is so like when you still purchase the full game, you didn't just play the entire game in playtest. We withheld features. So instead of having that entire blackout period, you still get the same effect, but you never had to stop your marketing. You can bleed through. Your community doesn't have to wait. I think it's more exciting that way. There are some hurdles additionally with like influencers and stuff like that. In some essence, like you can get a lot of influencers play during the playtest period. But if it is a period where you're fixing bugs and stuff, it might not be the best time for them to play. So the decision to actually launch the playtest comes down to when you feel like it's ready and when you don't have things like gray box and stuff that are going to make your game be perceived poorly.
Absolutely. Well, there was so much back and forth. It's hard to kind of cover all of our bases here, but I think what the biggest takeaway is, the launch of Extinction proves out at least a few different things to me, right? I think first and foremost, there is no such thing as a dead game, right? Frenzy VR, from the day it launched, has never been dead, right? It has consistently been one of the top sellers, but it then went from being one of the top sellers to being one of the top sellers. You go from being a top 100, a top 500 to being a top 30, a top 25, a top 15. Those are massive differences in user acquisition and sales, right? That experience wasn't just because of Extinction, but it wasn't without it. Bringing people back into a franchise and proving that there is life, that there is more to come, I think, is such a big point in why we're bringing mod support, why we're trying to build out additional features and free DLC for Extinction, is to show like, hey, when you buy one game, you help support the other. And when you like this experience, you're going to like that experience. And the store page reflects that, right? People want to buy the prerequisite title to understand the story, to understand some of the mechanics. And they especially want to do it when the upcoming game has just been announced. How many times do you replay a game series when you see the next in the franchise is coming out? I do it all the time. I will at least watch more content about it, right? Maybe I'll watch a YouTuber replay the original game, which then boosts the visibility of the original game where more people want to sell it. This is not something unique to VR, but it's something that, because the industry is so new, we don't get many experiences to see it happen. And it's just incredibly encouraging to see that paired with additional store features, no more walled garden, having new unique approaches like the playtest, and giving more feedback power to the community. So much of our TikTok content is based on what do you want to see next? What are your suggestions? What do you want to do with this game? And I think that that's kind of the core of what we've gotten to by the end of this process for Extinction and Frenzy, is when you give the power back to the players, to tell them, hey, this is about you first, not about what we want to build. It's about the features that you want to see. Then people want to play everything in the franchise because they know there's more to come, and that if they are supporting it, they will have a hand in building it. That's not something you see. And I think VR specifically, being in those worlds, feels much more powerful and much more purposeful to have control over than flat screen with a mouse and keyboard or on a controller. So I want to pass all those final thoughts off to you guys. What has the launch of Extinction kind of meant for both Clique Games and for Innoverse? And what are you most excited about for the future? And that's for anybody. So feel free.
I'd say from our side, it's shown that we can work with many different parties, launch a game that launches on the main store, and it still be a success. Not just Frenzy VR doing well. It's good to see that we can work on a completely different game with a similar history to it, and it still be a success. Not only in terms of the copy sold, but more so the fans who've enjoyed it and the fans who keep playing it and who will keep playing it for as long as possible, hopefully.
Yeah, I'll add on to that and just say we've obviously mentioned the differences between Frenzy and Frenzy Extinction. And at first it was, a little bit unsure whether we should even put the Frenzy name in Extinction with how different it was going to be. But it's showing that the two games are very much linked with mechanics, graphics, and fan bases. So it's very interesting to see the connection between the two, despite them having a different core gameplay experience.
I think from my side, it's what you said earlier, Brandon, which is like being a company that's presenting something versus actually being what players want and being able to now experiment with that, and this being like our first step into doing that. So I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, for me, I think it just proves the power of a well-executed franchise strategy, right? Frenzy Extinction's pre-launch marketing, not only created excitement for that game, but also brought players back to the original title in the franchise. And I think it's not just a testament to maybe the popularity of the original game and the ragdoll physics that make it unique, but really a clear example of if you can build out a good, solid, successful franchise strategy, it's going to help with the launch of your next title and all the ones following.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, Sam, thank you so much for joining us on this. It has been so much fun. Obviously, we talk every single week, but we don't get to talk about more of the general stuff and not the boring business stuff. And so it's really fun to get to dig into what these games really mean, right? And why it's so important. And I'm really glad that the outcome focuses on what we've always been talking about, which is the community and the people that are supporting the games. And so with all that being said, everybody, not just us, but everybody in VR is very excited to see what comes next from Innoverse. And so I hope you guys do not feel a massive weight on your shoulders, because it is exciting to know that a team like yours is out there pushing these kind of boundaries and consistently being top sellers on the store. I just really appreciate your time being able to share a little bit of that with everybody else.
No, but seriously, thank you from our side as well. Clique Games has been an absolute pleasure working with you guys. You guys have helped us more than we even thought we needed. And I'd like to say as well that we've all become pretty close, and we've created a good, strong business relationship, which will hopefully last for many, many more years.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.
If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. This is one of the coolest things we've ever gotten to do, and the Fireside Chats give all of us a better idea of what's going on with XR and how all of us can succeed better. And hopefully you could take some of this and apply it to your own projects. Thank you again for watching.